A 6-year-old boy vanished from a bustling grocery store aisle, his tiny hand slipping from his mother's grasp in a fleeting moment of distraction. 1 second, he was there, tugging at her sleeve, asking for a box of cereal with a cartoon, Tiger on it. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the hum of shoppers and the clatter of carts. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, indifferent to the panic that erupted. His mother's screams echoed through the store, a raw, primal sound that silenced conversations and froze strangers in their tracks. Police swarmed the scene, but the boy, small, brown-eyed, with a gap-toothed smile, was nowhere to be found. No witnesses. No trace. Just a void where a child had been. 19 years later, a set of fingerprints, smudged on a shattered coffee mug in a dingy diner in another state, matched a cold case folder buried in a police archive. The name on the file, Ethan Caldwell. The boy who disappeared. The grocery store in Willow Creek, Ohio, was the heart of the small town in 2006, a place where neighbors lingered over canned goods, swapping stories about harvests or high school football. Sarah Caldwell, a 32-year-old single mother, had brought her son Ethan there on a humid July afternoon. She was bone-tired, working 2 jobs, a waitress at Rosie's Diner and a part-time clerk at Harper's. Hardware to keep their small apartment heated and the fridge stocked. Ethan, 6 years old, was her anchor, a whirlwind of curiosity with his endless questions. "Mama, why do apples float? Why don't clouds fall down?" His voice was a melody she clung to, even when her mind was elsewhere. That day, Sarah's thoughts were scattered. Her landlord had left a voicemail about overdue rent, and her boss at the diner had snapped about her being late again. She was mentally juggling numbers. How much for groceries? How much for the electric bill? As she pushed the cart down aisle 7, Ethan trailing behind, his red sneakers scuffing the linoleum. She reached for a jar of peanut butter, checking the price, and when she turned back, Ethan was gone. At first, she thought he'd darted to the cereal aisle. He was obsessed with those colorful boxes she rarely splurged on. "Ethan?" she called, her voice sharp but not yet panicked. "Number." "Answer." She moved faster, her heart starting to race, her eyes scanning the shelves, the corners, the faces of strangers. "Ethan." The cart stood abandoned as she ran, her sneakers squeaking, her breath coming in short gasps. By the time the store manager dialed 911, Sarah was unraveling. She stood in the parking lot, clutching Ethan's favorite toy, a battered plastic dinosaur he dropped near the checkout. Her hands shook as she described him to the police. 6 years old, 3 feet 8 inches, wearing a blue T-shirt with a rocket. Ship, denim shorts, red sneakers, a faint scar above his left eyebrow from a bike accident. The officers scribbled notes, their radios crackling with urgency. An Amber Alert went out within hours, Ethan's photo flashing on every TV screen in Ohio. Search teams scoured the store, the parking lot, the nearby woods, even dragging the creek that ran behind the strip mall. Volunteers, neighbors, teachers, strangers combed the town, knocking on doors, checking backyards, calling Ethan's name until their throats were raw. Detective Paul Warner, a 48-year-old veteran with a reputation for tenacity, took charge of the case. Willow Creek was his town, a place where kids still played outside until dusk and folks left their doors unlocked. A child vanishing here wasn't just a crime. It was a wound to the community's core. Warner interviewed every employee, every shopper who'd been in the store that day. He pored over the store's security footage, but the cameras were outdated, their grainy images offering little. One clip showed Ethan in the cereal aisle, clutching a box of Frosted Flakes, his small face lit with excitement. Then he stepped out of frame. Nothing more. Theories sprouted like weeds. Some speculated Ethan had wandered outside and been hit by a car, the driver hiding the body in panic. Others whispered about a predator, a drifter, passing through, or, worse, someone local, hiding in plain sight. For a brief, ugly moment, suspicion turned to Sarah. Her financial struggles and a past relationship with a man named Ray Tillman, who'd been arrested for petty theft, fueled gossip. Warner shut it down. He'd seen Sarah's grief, her hollow eyes, her trembling hands as she clutched that dinosaur toy. No one could fake that kind of pain. Weeks bled into months. Leads evaporated. The Amber Alert faded from screens, replaced. I knew her tragedies. Willow Creek moved on, but Sarah couldn't. She quit her jobs, unable to focus, and moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment, its walls covered with Ethan's missing posters. She became a shadow, haunting the grocery store, retracing her steps as if she could summon him back. Warner, too, carried the case like a stone in his chest. He kept Ethan's file on his desk, even as new cases piled up. Every July, on the anniversary of the disappearance, he'd call Sarah, his voice heavy with the same promise. I haven't given up. In 2025, 600 miles away in Red Hollow, Tennessee, a young man named Jake Ellis worked the night shift at Millie's Diner, a 24-hour greasy spoon on the edge of town. Jake was 25, lean and quiet, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a guarded air that kept people at a distance. He'd drifted into Red Hollow a year earlier, renting a room above a dive bar and taking the diner job for cash under the table. He was efficient, quick with orders, polite but reserved. Customers liked him, though he shared little about himself. When asked about his past, he'd offer a vague, moved around a lot, and change the subject. Millie, the diner's owner, was a warm but sharp woman in her early 60s, with a knack for reading people. She'd taken a liking to Jake, sensing a quiet pain beneath his stoic exterior. She noticed how he flinched at loud noises, a dropped plate, a slammed door, or how his hands trembled slightly when he poured coffee after a long shift. Once she'd asked where he was from, and he'd muttered, "Nowhere special." His eyes fixed on the counter. Millie didn't pry, but she wondered about the sadness that clung to him. Like a shadow he couldn't shake. One night in March, a group of truckers rolled in, loud and half-drunk. Jake served them with his usual calm, but one, a burly man with a stained baseball cap, got belligerent over cold fries. The argument escalated, and when the man grabbed Jake's arm, Jake yanked free, knocking over a coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, and Jake froze, his breath shallow, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. Millie stepped in, her voice firm, effusing the tension. Jake cleaned up the shards, his hands steady now, but Millie saw the fear in his face, a flicker of something deeper than the moment warranted. The next morning, Officer Dana Ruiz, a local cop with a sharp eye and a restless mind, stopped by 4. Her usual coffee. She'd been at the diner the night before and noticed the broken mug. On a whim, she bagged a few of the larger pieces as evidence routine. She told herself, just to run prints. Red Hollow was a sleepy town, and she was itching for something to do. The prints went to the state database, and a week later, her sergeant called with a hit. The fingerprints matched a cold case from Ohio, a missing child named Ethan Caldwell. Ruiz was stunned. The boy would be 25 now, Jake's age. Ruiz kept it quiet, not even telling Millie. Instead, she started watching Jake. She'd come to the diner more often, sitting at the counter, making small talk. Jake was polite, but she noticed things. A faint scar above his left eyebrow. The way he dodged questions about his childhood. How he always seemed to know where the exits were. She pulled the Caldwell file from the national database, reading about the grocery store, Sarah's desperation, Warner's stalled investigation. The file included a photo of Ethan at 6, smiling with that gap-toothed grin. Ruiz studied it, then pictured Jake's face. The resemblance was uncanny, but she needed more than a hunch. Back in Willow Creek, Sarah was 51 now, her hair streaked with gray, her face carved by years of grief. She lived alone in her small apartment, surviving on disability checks after a breakdown a decade earlier. The walls were a gallery of Ethan's memory, his crayon drawings of spaceships and dinosaurs, his missing posters, yellowed but untouched. His plastic dinosaur sat on her nightstand, a relic she held every night before sleep. She'd stopped believing in miracles, but she never stopped waiting. Every phone call, every knock at the door, sent her heart racing. When Warner called on, a rainy April morning, his voice was different, hesitant, almost nervous. "Sarah, we got something," he said, "a fingerprint match." "In Tennessee." Sarah's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the phone pressed to her ear. Warner explained about the diner, the young man named Jake Ellis, the prints on the mug. "We don't know for sure it's Ethan," he cautioned. "But the age fits, and there's a scar. We're looking into it." Sarah barely heard him. Her mind was flooded with memories. Ethan's laugh, his small hand in hers, the moment she'd lost him. She begged Warner to take her to Tennessee. He hesitated. The case wasn't his jurisdiction anymore, and Red Hollow's police were handling it. But Sarah was relentless. "I'm his mother," she said, her voice cracking. "I need to see him." Warner, retired but still tethered to Ethan's case, gave in. He drove to Sarah's apartment, and they set out for Red Hollow, a 10-hour journey. In the car, Sarah was silent, clutching a faded photo of Ethan, her fingers tracing his face. Warner tried to prepare her. "He might not remember you," he said gently. "If it's him, he was so young when whatever happened." Sarah nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the road, as if she could will her son into existence at the end of it. In Red Hollow, Ruiz was digging deeper. Jake had no driver's license, no social security number on file with the diner. He was paid in cash, common for drifters, but suspicious in context. She followed him one night after his shift, watching as he walked to his room above the bar, head down, avoiding streetlights. She ran his name, Jake Ellis, through every database she could access. Nothing. It was as if he'd materialized out of nowhere. Ruiz contacted Warner, still listed as the lead on Ethan's case. They compared notes, and Warner shared details. Not in the file. Sarah's stories of Ethan's quirks, how he'd hum when nervous, how he slept with one foot sticking out from the blanket. Ruiz started observing Jake more closely. She noticed he hummed sometimes, a soft, tuneless melody, when he thought no one was listening. She saw him adjust his blanket one night through his window, one foot poking out. Small things, but they felt like pieces of a puzzle. Jake, meanwhile, was coming apart. He'd noticed Ruiz's frequent visits, her probing questions disguised as chit-chat. He'd always been careful, keeping his life small, his story vague, but her presence made his skin crawl. Nightmares he'd long buried resurfaced, flashes of a woman's voice calling a name he couldn't place, a dark room, the smell of damp earth. He'd wake sweating, heart pounding, unable to shake the sense that someone was closing in. One night, after a grueling double shift, Jake sat in his room, staring at a small metal box he kept under his bed. Inside were the only possessions he'd carried through years of drifting. A faded photo of a woman with kind eyes, her face blurred by time. A rusted key with no lock to match. And a child's drawing of a rocket ship, the lines shaky, the colors smudged. He didn't know why he kept them, but they felt like tethers to a life he couldn't recall. The rocket ship, especially, stirred something, a flicker of joy, then pain, like a memory just out of reach. Sarah and Warner arrived in Red Hollow at dusk, the sky heavy with clouds. They checked into a motel, and Warner contacted Ruiz, who agreed to meet them the next morning. Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the neon motel sign flicker, her mind racing. What if it was Ethan? What if he didn't know her? What if he wasn't her son? Hope, so long dormant, was a double-edged blade, cutting her with every possibility. Ruiz met them at a coffee shop, her expression guarded. She showed them a photo she'd taken of Jake at the diner, his back to the camera, pouring coffee. Sarah's breath caught. The slope of his shoulders, the way his hair fell, it was like seeing Ethan grown, a ghost made flesh. "It's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. Warner steadied her with a hand on her arm. "We need to be sure," he said. Ruiz outlined her plan. She'd bring Jake in for questioning, using a minor pretext, a workplace issue, maybe to avoid spooking him. She wasn't ready to mention the fingerprints. Warner agreed, but Sarah was desperate. "I need to see him now," she sighed, her eyes pleading. Ruiz hesitated, then relented. "You can come to the diner, but stay back. Don't approach him." That night, Sarah and Warner sat in a booth at Millie's, menus shielding their faces. Jake was working, moving between tables, his face tired but focused. Sarah watched him, her heart pounding. Every gesture, the way he tucked his hair behind. His ear, the quick smile he gave, a regular felt like Ethan's, yet different, shaped by years she hadn't witnessed. She wanted to run to him, to hold him, to beg him to remember. But she stayed still, her hands clasped, tears streaming down. Her face, Jake didn't notice them at first, too busy juggling orders and dodging Millie's teasing. But then he felt it, a prickle on his neck, like someone's gaze was boring into him. He turned, scanning the room, and his eyes locked with Sarah's for a fleeting moment. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name, familiarity. Fear, longing. Then a customer called for a refill, and he looked away, the moment slipping like sand. The next morning, Ruiz brought Jake to the station, claiming she needed to clear up a paperwork issue with his employment. Jake went reluctantly, his stomach churning. In the interview room, Ruiz was calm, her questions routine at first. How long had he worked at the diner? Where had he lived before Red Hollow? Jake's answers were short, practiced. "Moved around a lot," he said. "Don't stay anywhere long." Then Ruiz slid a photo across the table, Ethan Caldwell's missing poster, the boy's face smiling up at him. Jake's breath caught, his hands gripping the chair. "You recognize him?" Ruiz asked, her voice soft but pointed. Jake shook his head too quickly. "No, never seen him." But his eyes lingered on the photo, the scar above the boy's eyebrow, the rocket ship on his shirt. His head throbbed, memories clawing at him, fragmented like shards of a broken mirror. Ruiz leaned forward. "Jake, your fingerprints matched this case. From Ohio, a boy who disappeared 19 years ago." Jake's face went pale, his jaw tight. "You've got the wrong guy," he said, his voice low. "I don't know anything about that." But his hands were shaking, and Ruiz saw it. She didn't push further, not yet. She let him go, knowing he was rattled. Jake left the station, his mind a storm. He walked aimlessly, the town blurring around him. The name Ethan Caldwell meant nothing, yet it felt like a weight, a truth he'd been running from. He thought of the woman in the diner the night before, her eyes full of something he couldn't grasp. He thought of the rocket ship drawing in. His box, identical to the one on the boy's shirt in the poster. Sarah, Warner, and Ruiz met again that afternoon. Sarah was frantic, begging to talk to Jake. "He's my son," she said, her voice breaking. "I know it's him." Ruiz was cautious. "He's denying it, Sarah, and we don't have enough to hold him. If we push too hard, he might run." Warner nodded. We need more DNA, maybe, or something to jog his memory. But Sarah couldn't wait. That night, she went back to the diner alone, against Warner's advice. Jake was there, wiping down the counter, his face drawn. Sarah approached, her heart in her throat. "Jake," she said softly. He looked up, startled, and they stared. At each other, the air thick with unspoken questions. "Do you know me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake's eyes searched her face, and something flickered recognition, buried deep. But he shook his head, stepping back. "Lady, I don't." "Know you," he said, his voice rough. Sarah's face crumpled, but she didn't leave. She reached into her purse and pulled out the plastic dinosaur, placing it on the counter. "This was yours," she whispered. "You loved it." Jake stared at the toy, his breath shallow. His hand reached out, almost touching it, then pulled back, his face hardening. "You've got the wrong guy," he said, turning away. But Sarah saw the doubt in his eyes, the fear. She left the diner, tears streaming, but she felt a spark of hope. He hadn't thrown the toy away. He'd kept it on the counter, his fingers, brushing it as he worked. The trail of Ethan's disappearance didn't end with the fingerprints. Back in Willow Creek, Warner had been digging into old case files, chasing a lead he'd never fully explored. In 2006, a delivery driver named Carl Vance had been at the grocery store the day Ethan vanished. Vance, a loner with a history of petty crimes, had left town shortly after, claiming he'd gotten a job in Kentucky. Warner had interviewed him at the time, but Vance's alibi delivering produce to a nearby town had checked out. Still, something about the man's nervous demeanor had stuck with Warner. Now, with the fingerprint match, Warner wondered if Vance was worth another look. He tracked Vance's movements through old records. After leaving Willow Creek, Vance had bounced around small towns in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia, working odd jobs: delivery, construction, janitorial. Warner found a 2010 arrest in Chattanooga for drunk and disorderly conduct, but nothing since. It was a thin thread, but Warner's gut told him to pull it. He shared the lead with Ruiz, who ran Vance's name through Tennessee's databases. She found a hit. Carl Vance was living in a trailer park 20 miles from Red Hollow, working as a mechanic. Ruiz decided to pay him a visit, keeping it low-key to avoid tipping him off. Vance was in his late 50s now, wiry and weathered, with a smoker's cough and a guarded stare. Ruiz posed as a customer needing a tire change, probing casually about his time in Ohio. Vance was evasive, claiming he barely remembered Willow Creek, but when Ruiz mentioned the grocery store, his hands fumbled with a wrench, and he changed the subject. Ruiz didn't push, but she left with a feeling. Vance knew something. Meanwhile, Jake's world was shrinking. The nightmares were relentless now, more vivid each night. He saw a man's face hard, unshaven, with cold eyes, heard a woman's voice calling Ethan, felt the rough grip of a hand on his arm. He started avoiding the diner's busier shifts, telling Millie he was sick. She didn't buy it, but she gave him space, sensing he was on edge. Jake spent hours in his room, staring at the items in his box. The photo of the woman haunted him. Her smile felt like home, but he couldn't place her. The key, too, gnawed at him. What did it open? Why did it matter? One night, unable to sleep, Jake walked to the edge of town, to a bridge over a dry creek bed. He stood there, the wind sharp against his face, and thought about running. He'd done it before New Town, new name, no questions, but something stopped him. The dinosaur on the counter, the woman's eyes, the name Ethan Caldwell, they were anchors pinning him in place. He didn't know who he was, but for the first time, he wanted to find out. Sarah, back at the motel, was falling apart. Every moment without answers felt like losing Ethan again. She pored over old photos, letters, anything that might prove Jake was her son. She found a drawing Ethan had made at Five, a rocket ship, identical to the one in Jake's box, though. She didn't know about his. She showed it to Warner, her hands shaking. "He drew this," she said. "If I show it to him, he'll remember." Warner was skeptical, but didn't argue. He knew Sarah needed to do something, anything, to keep. From breaking Ruiz, meanwhile, was piecing together a theory. What if Jake was Ethan, taken all those years ago, raised under a different name? Amnesia, trauma, or manipulation could explain his lack of memory. But who had taken him, and why? She dug into Red Hollow's underbelly, talking to locals, checking old police reports. She found a mention of a transient camp near the highway in the early 2000s, a place where drifters and runaways passed through. Vance had lived there briefly, according to a bartender who'd known him. Ruiz wondered if Ethan had been taken there, hidden among the forgotten. The air in Red Hollow, Tennessee, was thick with the promise of rain, the kind that could wash away secrets or bury them deeper. Jake Ellis stood on the bridge over the dry creek bed, the wind biting his face, his mind a tangle of questions. The name Ethan Caldwell echoed in his head, a ghost he couldn't shake. The woman in the diner, Sarah, her eyes, her voice, the plastic dinosaur she'd left on the counter, had cracked something open inside him. He didn't know who he was anymore, but for the first time in years, he wasn't running. He wanted answers, even if they hurt. Sarah Caldwell, back at the motel, clutched the drawing of the rocket ship Ethan had made at 5, her fingers trembling as she traced the shaky lines. She was 51, worn thin by 19 years of grief, but the spark of hope ignited by Jake's fingerprints burned bright. She knew he was her son. She felt it in her bones, but proving it was another matter. Detective Paul Warner, retired but tethered to her pain, sat across from her, his face heavy with caution. Officer Donna Ruiz, the young cop from Red Hollow, was their bridge to Jake, but her investigation was stirring up more questions than answers. And somewhere in the shadows, Carl Vance, the delivery driver from 2006, loomed like a specter, his past a thread Warner and Ruiz couldn't ignore. Jake returned to his room above the bar, the plastic dinosaur in his pocket, its edges worn smooth from years of Ethan's small hands. He pulled out the metal box from under his bed, spilling its contents onto the thin mattress. The faded photo of a woman, the rusted key, the child's drawing of a rocket ship. He stared at the drawing, his heart pounding. It was identical to the one on the missing poster Ruiz had shown him. The rocket's red crayon streaks, the wobbly stars. How could he have it? His nightmares flared. A man's rough voice, a dark room, the smell of damp earth. He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to force the memories into focus, but they slipped away like smoke dot at Millie's diner. Millie noticed Jake's absence. He'd called in sick again, his voice shaky over the phone. She'd seen him unraveling. Since the night of the broken mug, his usual calm replaced by a restless edge. Millie had her own history with loss. Her daughter, lost to addiction years ago, and she recognized the haunted look in Jake's eyes. She cornered Officer Ruiz during her next coffee run. "What's going on with Jake?" she asked, her voice low. "He's not himself." Ruiz hesitated, weighing how much to share. "Just routine checks," she said, but Millie's sharp gaze didn't buy it. "Don't lie to me, Dana. That boy's scared, and you're part of it." Ruiz promised to keep an eye on him, but Millie wasn't satisfied. She decided to talk to Jake herself. Ruiz, meanwhile, was closing in on Carl Vance. She'd visited his trailer, posing as a customer, and his nervous fumble with the wrench had confirmed her suspicions. She dug deeper, pulling records from the Yak. Transient camp near Red Hollow's highway, where Vance had stayed in the early 2000s. Old police reports mentioned a string of petty thefts in the area, and Vance's name popped up more than once. She also found a 2007 report from a nearby town. A woman had seen a man matching Vance's description with a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, at a gas station. The boy had been quiet, clinging to the man's side, and something about it had unsettled her enough to call the police. The report went nowhere, no evidence, no follow-up. But Ruiz's gut told her it was a piece of Ethan's puzzle. She shared the lead with Warner, who was back in Willow Creek, combing through his old notes. Warner remembered Vance's interview in 2006. The man had been sweaty, too quick to answer, his alibi airtight but rehearsed. Warner had let it go then, overwhelmed by the case's chaos, but now he cursed himself for not pushing harder. He called Ruiz, suggesting they bring Vance in for questioning, but Ruiz wanted more evidence. "If he's our guy, he's slippery," she said. "We need to catch him off guard." Ruiz enlisted a local informant, a bartender named Lenny, who'd known Vance for years. Lenny was a grizzled ex-con, loyal to Red Hollow, but willing to talk for the right price. Over a beer at his bar, he told Ruiz about Vance's habits late night. Drives, a storage unit he visited often, a tendency to vanish when cops came around. Lenny also mentioned a woman, Ellen Harper, who'd lived with Vance in the early 2000s. Ellen had been a drifter, too, with a history of mental health struggles. She died in 2015, but Lenny said she talked about a kid once, a boy Vance looked after for a while. Ruiz's pulse quickened. She tracked down Ellen's sister, Marla, who lived in a nearby trailer park. Marla was wary, her face lined with years of hard living. She hadn't spoken to Ellen in years before her death, but she remembered a phone call in 2007. Ellen had been frantic, talking about a boy she and Vance were raising, a boy who wasn't theirs. Ellen had wanted to leave Vance, but she was scared. He'd threatened her, said he'd hurt the boy if she talked. Marla hadn't taken it seriously then, chalking it up to Ellen's instability. But now, with Ruiz's questions, it felt chillingly real. Marla didn't know where the boy was now, but she gave Ruiz a lead. Ellen had kept a journal, hidden in a lockbox at the storage unit Vance still rented. Sarah couldn't stay away from the diner. She went back every night, sitting in the same booth, watching Jake. Warner tried to stop her, warning that she might push Jake away, but Sarah was beyond reason. She needed to see him, to hold on to the fragile hope that he was Ethan. One night, she brought the rocket ship drawing, sliding it across the counter when Jake came to refill her coffee. "You made this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "When you were 5, you loved rockets." Jake froze, his hand hovering over the pot. He stared at the drawing, his breath uneven. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice cracked. He walked away, but Sarah saw him slip the drawing into his pocket. Jake's world was collapsing. The nightmares were relentless. Now a man's voice saying, "Stay quiet, kid." A woman's sobs, a locked door. He started remembering fragments. A small room with peeling wallpaper, a woman who smelled of lavender, a man who scared him. He couldn't tell if they were real or conjured, but they felt like pieces of himself. He went to Millie, the only person he trusted, and told her about the woman, the drawing, the cops' questions. Millie listened, her face tight with worry. "Jake, if you're in trouble, you need to face it," she said. "Running won't help." Jake wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Ruiz got a warrant for Vance's storage unit. She and Warner, who'd driven back to Red Hollow, searched it late one night. The unit was a mess boxes of junk, old clothes, car parts, but they found the lockbox Marla had mentioned. Inside was Ellen's journal, its pages brittle and stained. Ellen's handwriting was shaky, but the entries were damning. She wrote about a boy Vance had brought home in 2006, a boy he called Tommy, but who didn't answer to it at first. Ellen described how Vance kept the boy locked in a room, how he'd cry for his mother at night. Ellen wanted to help him, but Vance controlled her with threats and drugs. One entry, dated 2008, read, "He's not ours, but Carl says he's better off with us." I don't believe him. The boy's eyes, they're so sad. I think his real name is Ethan. Ruiz and Warner exchanged a look. This was at the link they needed. They brought Vance in for questioning the next morning. Vance was defiant, claiming he didn't know any boy named Ethan or Tommy. But when Ruiz showed him the journal, his bravado cracked. He started sweating, his eyes darting to the door. Ellen was crazy, he said. She made things up. Ruiz pressed harder, mentioning the gas station sighting, the fingerprints, Jake's scar. Vance's hands shook, but he stuck to his story. Ruiz didn't have enough to hold him, but she knew he was lying. Jake couldn't avoid Sarah anymore. She came to the diner again, this time with a photo album, Ethan's baby pictures, his kindergarten drawings, a lock of his hair. She set it on the counter, her eyes pleading. "Look at this," she said. "Please." Jake wanted to walk away, but something stopped him. He flipped through the album, each page a jolt. A photo of a boy with a gap-toothed smile, holding a dinosaur toy. A drawing of a rocket ship just like his. A woman, Sarah, smiling, holding the boy. Her face matched the faded photo in his box. His hands trembled, his throat tight. "Where? Did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You're my son, Ethan. You were taken from me." Jake shook his head, but the denial felt hollow. The memories were flooding now. A grocery store. A woman's voice calling his name, a man's hand pulling him away. He remembered being scared, then numb, then nothing. He looked at Sarah, her face raw with hope and pain, and felt a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Ruiz and Warner decided to confront Jake with the journal. They brought him to the station, this time with Sarah waiting outside. Ruiz laid out the evidence, the fingerprints, the journal, Vance's connection to the transient camp. "Jake, we think you're Ethan Caldwell," she said. "You were taken from a grocery store in Ohio in 2006. Carl Vance is a suspect. We need your help to figure out what happened." Jake's face was pale, his hands clenched. He didn't speak, but his eyes were locked on the journal, on Ellen's words about a boy with sad eyes. Sarah was allowed into the room, against Ruiz's better judgment. She didn't touch Jake, didn't speak, just stood there, tears streaming. Jake looked at her, then at the dinosaur toy he'd brought with him, still in his pocket. "I don't remember being Ethan," he said finally, his voice breaking. "But I remember something. A woman who smelled like lavender. A man who scared me. A room I couldn't leave." Sarah sobbed, her hand covering her mouth. Jake looked at her, his own eyes wet. "Were you my mom?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She reached for him, but Jake flinched, not ready. "I need time," he said. Ruiz nodded, giving them space. Warner, watching from the corner, felt a weight lift, but the case wasn't closed. Vance was still free, and the full story of Ethan's 19 years was still buried. Ruiz arrested. Vance the next day, using Ellen's journal and a DNA match from Jake to build a case. Under pressure, Vance confessed. In 2006, he'd been in debt to a low-level trafficker in Ohio. Desperate for cash, he'd taken Ethan from the grocery store, planning to sell him to a contact in the transient camp. But the deal fell through, and Vance kept the boy, renaming him Tommy and moving him across state lines. Ellen, his girlfriend at the time, had been complicit but conflicted, raising Ethan as best she could until her death. Vance had abandoned him at 15, leaving him to fend for himself. Jake's memories were fractured because of trauma and years of manipulation. Jake Ethan struggled to reconcile his past. He met with Sarah daily, slowly piecing together memories. The lavender scent was her perfume. The rocket ship was his favorite toy. Sarah was patient, giving him space, though every moment without him felt like a loss. Millie became his anchor in Red Hollow, offering him a job and a place to stay as he navigated his identity. Warner and Ruiz closed the case. But both knew the real work was just beginning, helping Ethan and Sarah heal. One evening, Ethan visited Sarah at the motel. He brought the dinosaur toy and the rocket ship drawing. "I don't know if I'll ever feel like Ethan," he said, his voice soft, "but I want to try." Sarah hugged him, her tears soaking his shirt, and for the first time in 19 years, she felt whole.